Hello, I'm Sarah Heffernan, an MA graduate of the National College of Art and Design, and I'm so excited to explore long-time thinking and the Futures of Food project with you. Before I get into it, I'd like to thank everyone in the National College of Art and Design and IMMA for giving me the opportunity to share an idea I care about today. This will be a slight variation of the presentation I gave during my interview for the RSA Student Design Awards 2021. I want to frame the next few minutes by sharing the tension I experienced in putting my awards presentation together. While speculative, this project is grounded in service design, systems thinking, strategy, and foresight. And so I struggled with, do I demonstrate the business case for it, or do I talk about what really matters to me in this context, and what I think can have the most impact on helping people care about the long-term future? Now you can see the rigor of my work in my awards application or on my portfolio website. So for today, I'd like to reflect on what I've learned to value through doing this project. Often as designers and as people, we tend to focus on newness and innovation and technology, perhaps solving all of the problems we've created. And when I started this project, I couldn't have envisaged what it would become, but I have to acknowledge that it is not about creating something new. It quite poetically comes back to the origin of the word restaurant. A restaurant is a food you use to restore yourself, and throughout history, the best restaurants are the ones that make you feel good. They restore you. And while this project explores the challenges and mysteries of our food culture and ecosystem, it ultimately comes down to restoring some of what we've lost. The restaurant collective I've proposed restores our communities through food. It restores social connection, care for the land that nourishes us, respect for the wisdom and traditions of our ancestors, and visibility in our food systems, where our food comes from, how it's produced, and who produces it. And it encourages consideration for the futures ahead of us and inspires thought for how we can become better ancestors today. It also restores meitheal, the traditional Irish practice of a group of people, usually neighbours, coming together to help each other with tasks like harvesting crops, fixing roofs, and painting homes. It was a reciprocal, cooperative practice at the heart of which was a community of people working together for the common good and benefit of that community. Now, I don't have personal experience with meitheal, but my parents grew up in rural Ireland in the 60s and were probably the last generation to just about live through it. And when they reflect on meitheal, they use strong words, strong emotions like love, but they also use the word could. You could call on a neighbour, not necessarily you can call on a neighbour. That really stuck with me, because as I've moved through this project and gathered various insights, not just into our food systems, but into other traditions and cultures and practices, and even now as I consider the social innovation work of Amandeep Kaur and Diane Roussan and how the folklorist Henry Glassy reflects on storytelling in Ireland, and with all of this, I find myself grieving for a way of life I've never experienced. And I don't want that for future generations. I don't want the actions I take today to steal something from people in the future. And that's why this project takes such great care to look back, to look forward. Because though contested, history provides us with a wealth of information regarding the wisdom and behaviours of people. First Nation Indigenous peoples don't just consider 7 generations future, but 7 generations past when making decisions in the now. The Māori people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, hold a spiritual connection with the land, soil, and water. They are guardians of these treasures and do not view them as resources to be owned or squandered, but as extensions of themselves almost. Storytelling encourages these practices and cultures, and they are stories of connection, relationships, and love. Our history is made up of stories. Through colonization and industrialization and practices that define progress, we've forgotten or neglected too much of it. Storytelling can bring our shared history and wisdom forward, and it can help us build a relationship and emotional connection with each other, with the earth, and with our shared futures. So with that purpose in mind, I'd like to finish my presentation today with a story I created during this project. It served as both a diegetic prototype or provocatype for a possible future, and a way of connecting people with that future and encouraging them to think about what it means to them in the context of their lives today. I hope it inspires you to do the same. We live on an island, and 25 years ago, we were asked and then forced to think like one and live like one. The crises in the run-up to the Ireland First Protocol should have been an opportunity for us to recreate our food system. The pandemics, lockdowns, climate catastrophes, they should have prepared us for what we needed to accomplish post-2025, but very few people and businesses were ready for it. It was unthinkable, and the unthinkable is just too scary to think about.
The defining incident of the last 50 years could have been the Christchurch earthquake. It could have been any one of the hurricanes to hit the US. It could have been the tsunami that struck Thailand, Indonesia, and Japan. It could have been the forest fires in Australia or the melting of the polar ice caps. But it wasn't any of these things. It was a virus called COVID-19. And the cause of that virus is still debated today, 30 years later, but the impact of it is certain.
Sometimes a crisis has a way of breaking through the noise to highlight what's really broken and why it matters. In 2018 in Ireland, the average age of a farmer was 57. Regrettably, the sector declined due to poor returns. We had become a nation that imported the majority of what we needed, or thought we needed. We had this proud heritage of the Irish soda bread, for example, but we were importing 95% of our flour. How Irish can something be if the main ingredient is imported? We didn't realise at the time what we had been losing, not just the skills of farmers, but the actual ability of the land to produce food. We let all of that go in favour of cheaper, imported foods without ever considering the broader consequences of what we were doing.
In the decade before COVID-19 struck, people had started to pay more attention to what ingredients went into their food and where those ingredients came from. But the struggle of early 2020s put the future in hyperdrive. This had a lasting impact on consumer habits and behaviours. It became all about local, traceable produce.
By 2024, the press were already a couple of years ahead of the curve and were able to lead the way to a stronger, more resilient future. They had developed these collectives of growers, producers and makers with a determination to have everything, including packaging, of the island. They partnered with other businesses and managed to convince some of the biggest players in tech to use their spaces as testbeds for this new era of production. As life in Ireland grew increasingly challenging throughout the 2020s, the press and their collaborators and members grew stronger as they profited through their shared purpose. They supported the land, that supported the farmer, that supported the restaurant. I don't think anyone would say it's perfect. There's good and there's bad. We've learned how to make the most of what we have here on the island, and we've become so creative in what we can produce. But we've lost regular access to things like bananas and coffee, which I'm told people used to have all the time. My mom is keeping all her fingers and toes crossed she wins the next lottery, so I can try a banana for the first time. I know older generations feel almost bereaved for what they lost in terms of travel and international produce. And life did get worse here before it got better. But personally, as a member of the generation that followed, I don't necessarily feel that same sense of loss. When restaurants closed the gap between producers and consumers, the benefits were huge. And I think there's a profound sense of pride among the nation of what the island and its people have been able to achieve.